Florida didn't become unaffordable overnight. It was dismantled quietly, price by price, bill by bill, renewal by renewal. What used to be a place where ordinary people built ordinary lives now feels engineered to exhaust them financially. Yet beyond the collapsing insurance market, the speculative housing frenzy, and the illusion of endless growth, there are towns that never surrendered to the madness. Places that stayed rooted while everything around them inflated into fantasy. What follows is a map of where affordability still survives in Florida, not as nostalgia, but as a living contradiction to the state's economic direction and cultural drift. Number 10. Frostproof. If Florida ever needed proof that affordability didn't go extinct, it quietly hid the evidence in a town called Frostproof. This small Polk County community, home to just over 3,400 residents, sits between Lake Clinch and Lake Reedy, far enough from coastal chaos to remain economically unbothered. Frostproof runs on a scale that modern Florida has almost forgotten, one where distances are measured in minutes, not stress levels, and where a traffic delay usually involves a tractor, not a toll booth. What secures Frostproof's position is its resistance to becoming financially absurd. Median home values still float around $190,000, with livable properties occasionally dipping below $170,000. Numbers that feel out of place in a state where the average home price now flirts with $400,000. Rental prices follow the same pattern. One-bedroom units often sit near $700 to $800, while three-bedroom homes commonly stay under $1,200, making it one of the few Florida towns where housing no longer requires creative math. Property taxes rarely exceed $1,700 annually on modest homes, and utility costs remain relatively stable, partly because Frostproof lacks the sprawling infrastructure that quietly inflates bills in larger cities. The median household income hovers near $42,000, which explains why luxury never became the town's currency. Sustainability did. This affordability doesn't come polished. Employment leans toward healthcare, agriculture, warehousing, and public services, not high-paying tech corridors. Internet speeds are serviceable, not theatrical. Grocery selection is practical rather than indulgent. But crime rates remain well below state averages, not through spectacle enforcement, but because anonymity never fully took root here. What Frostproof offers is something Florida increasingly struggles to produce: predictability without stagnation. Quiet streets, stable prices, and lakes that still belong more to fishermen than developers. Frostproof doesn't advertise survival. It simply practices it. Quietly, consistently, and without asking anyone to clap. Number 9. Palatka is what happens when a Florida town refuses to audition for the role of next overpriced hotspot, and instead decides to just function. Resting along the St. Johns River in Putnam County, Palatka carries a population just north of 10,000, large enough to sustain real infrastructure, yet small enough to avoid becoming a lifestyle brand. It's one of the rare riverfront communities where the water still belongs more to fishermen than to investors, pretending they discovered nature. Housing here behaves like it didn't get the memo about Florida's pricing hysteria. Median home values typically land between $175,000 and $195,000, with older properties slipping below $160,000 without requiring supernatural repairs. Rent follows the same tone. One-bedrooms hover near $750 to $850, while three-bedrooms usually remain under $1,200, which in modern Florida feels less like a market and more like a loophole. That affordability is supported by a grounded economy. Healthcare, logistics, public services, and light manufacturing dominate employment, with median household income sitting near $41,000. It's not glamorous, but it's functional, and that's the point. Property taxes often remain below $1,600 annually, and insurance premiums haven't yet joined the state's favorite hobby of exploding. Of course, Palatka doesn't pretend to be curated. Shopping is practical, not theatrical. Internet works, but doesn't try to impress. Nightlife exists in theory. Crime stays mostly localized and predictable, not ambient or omnipresent, which keeps daily life steady rather than tense. What Palatka does exceptionally well is something Florida increasingly struggles with: remaining livable without turning itself into a financial obstacle course. No coastal hype, no speculative fever, just a town quietly staying within economic reach while others sprint away from it. Palatka doesn't chase Florida's future. It survives by refusing to become its cautionary tale. Number 8. Belle Glade. Belle Glade does not introduce itself politely. It announces very clearly that this is not Florida's postcard version, and never tried to be. Sitting on the southern edge of Lake Okeechobee, Belle Glade carries a population just over 17,000, built almost entirely around agriculture, logistics, and the quiet machinery of feeding half the country. This is sugarcane territory where trucks move before tourists wake up and where economic value is measured in acreage, not aesthetic. What immediately separates Belle Glade from most Florida towns is how aggressively it ignores the state's pricing theater. Median home values still sit near $165,000 to $185,000, with some livable properties dropping below $150,000, a number that now feels borderline illegal south of Orlando. Rent remains equally resistant to inflation theatrics. One-bedroom units often hover near $700, and three-bedrooms frequently remain under $1,100, making Belle Glade one of the few places left where housing doesn't feel like a puzzle designed to fail. But affordability here doesn't come wrapped in charm. Job markets are concentrated in agriculture, warehousing, food processing, and public services, with median household income near $39,000, which explains why luxury retail never arrived. Grocery prices remain reasonable thanks to proximity to production, though dining options lean practical rather than adventurous. Internet works. Nightlife politely does not. Crime exists, but its patterns are narrow and geographically defined rather than drifting across neighborhoods. Daily life outside those pockets remains remarkably calm, especially for a town so economically concentrated. What Belle Glade quietly offers is something Florida rarely produces anymore: a town built around necessity rather than aspiration. No speculative fever, no artificial reinvention, just a working community that stayed priced for the people who actually live there. Belle Glade isn't overlooked. It simply never asked for permission to become expensive. Number 7. Live Oak. Live Oak feels like a place that looked at Florida's growth charts, nodded politely, and then decided not to participate. Located in Suwannee County near the Georgia line, Live Oak carries a population just under 7,000, making it small enough to breathe and large enough to function without turning into a novelty. This is North Florida, where pine forests outnumber palm trees and where summer heat arrives without the accompanying real estate delusions. What keeps Live Oak firmly in the affordability conversation is its housing math, which still behaves like it belongs in a different decade. Median home prices typically fall between $185,000 and $205,000, with older homes dipping below $170,000 without requiring heroic renovation budgets. Rent mirrors that restraint. One-bedroom units often sit around $725 to $825, while three-bedroom homes usually remain under $1,200, a range that now feels quietly rebellious across much of the state. Property taxes remain gentle, frequently below $1,500 annually for modest homes, and insurance premiums avoid the coastal volatility that has quietly destabilized much of Florida's housing market. Utilities also run lower than state averages, partly because Live Oak isn't paying to maintain beach infrastructure it doesn't have. The local economy runs on healthcare, manufacturing, logistics, and public employment, with median household income hovering near $44,000. It's not a town chasing high salaries. It's one designed around low financial friction. Broadband access is stable enough for remote work, though speeds favor reliability over spectacle. Grocery prices sit slightly below state averages, and fuel costs benefit from proximity to major freight corridors. Crime rates remain below Florida's median, largely because anonymity never took root here. You don't disappear in Live Oak. You exist, visibly, socially, and with consequence. What Live Oak delivers isn't excitement or reinvention. It delivers continuity, predictable expenses, manageable taxes, and housing that doesn't demand financial gymnastics. Live Oak doesn't pretend to be Florida's future. It survives by being stubbornly comfortable with its present. Number 6. Arcadia. Arcadia feels like Florida paused here and decided not to press fast forward. Located in DeSoto County, roughly 50 miles inland from the Gulf Coast, Arcadia supports just over 8,000 residents, which keeps it functional without ever drifting into congestion. This is cattle country Florida, where rodeos still matter more than rooftop lounges, and where the skyline hasn't been replaced by cranes pretending to be progress. What defines Arcadia is how deliberately uninflated it remains. Median home values generally range from $180,000 to $200,000, with older homes still dipping into the mid-150,000s, a range that now feels incompatible with modern Florida's pricing logic. Rent follows suit. One-bedroom units frequently settle near $750 to $850, and three-bedroom homes often stay below $1,200, preserving something rare in the state: housing that doesn't require emotional compromise. Property taxes typically fall under $1,400 annually for modest homes, and insurance rates avoid the coastal chaos that quietly destabilized much of the state's market. Utility costs also trend lower than Florida averages, partly because Arcadia never built the kind of sprawling infrastructure that quietly taxes residents everywhere else. The local economy leans into agriculture, logistics, light manufacturing, healthcare, and public services, producing a median household income around $43,000. No one sells Arcadia as a launchpad for wealth, but stability here is not theoretical. It's visible in how few people feel forced to leave. Broadband access supports remote work competently, even if nobody here is pretending to incubate the next tech unicorn. Crime rates sit below state medians, not because of spectacle policing, but because social visibility still carries real weight. Arcadia doesn't chase Florida's future or mourn its past. It quietly occupies a version of the present where life remains financially intelligible. And that, in today's Florida, is its quiet rebellion. Number 5. Sebring. Sebring carries the strange confidence of a place that never asked permission to become livable. Set in Highlands County and surrounded by more than 100 freshwater lakes, Sebring supports roughly 11,000 residents, many of whom arrived for retirement and stayed because the math worked better than expected. This is inland Florida, where ocean premiums don't distort daily life, and where the absence of spectacle keeps expenses grounded. Housing remains one of Sebring's quiet advantages. Median home prices generally sit between $185,000 and $210,000, with older properties dipping below $170,000 without requiring heroic repairs. Rent follows the same restraint. One-bedroom units commonly land near $800 to $900, while three-bedroom homes often stay under $1,300, preserving access to space without forcing financial surrender. Taxes remain cooperative. Property taxes on modest homes frequently stay below $1,600 annually, and insurance premiums avoid the volatility that coastal Florida residents increasingly treat as a second mortgage. Utilities also run slightly below state averages, aided by flat terrain and relatively predictable infrastructure demands. Employment revolves around healthcare, education, retail, logistics, and seasonal tourism, producing a median household income near $46,000. Broadband access is solid enough for remote work, and medical access is unusually strong for a town of this size, anchored by regional hospitals and specialty clinics that reduce the need for long commutes. Crime rates stay below Florida's median, particularly in residential zones, creating a daily environment that feels calm rather than controlled. The town leans older, with a median age above 45, which quietly suppresses volatility without draining the place of energy. Sebring does not perform reinvention. It survives by being useful, affordable, and geographically boring in all the right ways. A combination Florida is rapidly running out of. Number 4. Perry. Perry looks like the kind of town that learned to live cheaply before it became fashionable again. Located in Taylor County along Florida's Gulf Bend, Perry holds just over 7,000 residents, operating in a zone where coastal proximity exists without coastal pricing insanity. This is working Florida: pulp mills, forestry, healthcare, and logistics shaping the economy more than boutiques ever could. Housing remains aggressively grounded. Median home values typically fall between $150,000 and $175,000, with livable homes still surfacing below $140,000, a bracket that now borders on myth elsewhere in the state. Rent behaves accordingly. One-bedroom units often sit around $700 to $800, and three-bedrooms rarely exceed $1,100, allowing families to exist without arithmetic anxiety. Ownership carries equally rare advantages. Property taxes frequently remain under $1,300 annually, and insurance premiums stay manageable due to Perry's position outside the highest-risk coastal flood zones. Utility costs remain lower than state averages, partly because Perry never built the sprawling infrastructure that silently taxes residents in Florida's larger metros. Employment centers around manufacturing, paper production, public services, and regional healthcare, generating a median household income near $41,000. This isn't a town built for wealth acceleration, it's built for cost containment, which increasingly matters more. Crime rates remain moderate and localized, not ambient or performative, contributing to a daily atmosphere that feels steady rather than tense. Broadband access supports modern work requirements, even if no one here is pretending to be Silicon Valley's understudy. Perry doesn't market itself as a miracle. It simply persists as a place where Florida's numbers still work. And that quiet practicality is what makes it increasingly rare. Number 3. Lake City. Lake City operates like a pressure valve for modern Florida, releasing everything that usually inflates the cost of simply existing. Anchored at the intersection of Interstates 75 and 10, this North Florida hub sits in a logistical position most cities would monetize into oblivion. Instead, with a population just over 12,500, Lake City remains scaled for living rather than extracting. It is large enough to sustain hospitals, colleges, and distribution networks, yet restrained enough to avoid converting necessity into spectacle. Housing reflects that discipline. Median home prices typically range between $185,000 and $210,000, with structurally sound older homes still appearing in the mid-160,000s without requiring emotional resilience or contractor roulette. Rent follows the same logic. One-bedroom units frequently settle near $775 to $875, while three-bedroom homes often remain under $1,250, keeping family-sized space accessible rather than symbolic. Ownership is a relief. Property taxes routinely fall below $1,500 annually on modest homes, and insurance premiums remain tame compared to coastal markets where coverage has become a financial stress test. Utility costs sit slightly below Florida's median, helped by Lake City's compact footprint and absence of tourism-driven infrastructure bloat. The economic engine here is quiet but functional. Healthcare, logistics, education, light manufacturing, and regional retail dominate employment, producing a median household income near $45,000. Broadband access reliably supports remote work, and the city's proximity to Gainesville and Jacksonville preserves access to higher-wage markets without importing their housing distortions. Crime rates remain geographically concentrated rather than ambient, keeping most residential zones calm and predictable. Medical access is a regional advantage, with facilities serving much of North Florida, an often overlooked pillar of livability. Lake City doesn't attempt reinvention. It survives by remaining economically intelligible, a place where infrastructure exists, prices behave, and daily life doesn't require financial gymnastics. And in today's Florida, that restraint feels almost radical. Number 2. Clewiston. Clewiston operates like a town that saw Florida's pricing spiral coming and quietly stepped out of the way. Perched on the southern edge of Lake Okeechobee, Clewiston supports just over 7,300 residents, yet manages to feel more structurally honest than towns 10 times its size. This is sugarcane Florida, where freight trucks move before sunrise and economic gravity is measured in acreage rather than aesthetics. What gives Clewiston its leverage is how unremarkable its housing math remains. Median home values usually sit between $160,000 and $180,000, with livable properties still slipping under $150,000, a range that now feels like a clerical error elsewhere in the state. Rent follows the same discipline. One-bedroom units often land around $700 to $800, while three-bedroom homes stay near $1,100, allowing actual families to exist without converting budgets into survival puzzles. Property taxes frequently remain below $1,300 annually, and insurance pricing avoids the coastal panic that has turned coverage into a second mortgage elsewhere. Utilities trend lower than state averages, largely because Clewiston never built infrastructure for spectacle, only for use. Employment revolves around agriculture, food processing, logistics, healthcare, and public services, producing a median household income near $40,000. This is not a town chasing luxury wages. It's engineered for endurance. Broadband access meets modern work needs reliably, even if no one here is pretending to host a startup gold rush. Crime stays narrow and predictable rather than drifting across neighborhoods. Schools, streets, and services function without noise, which increasingly feels like a feature. Clewiston doesn't reshape itself for attention. It stays usable, economically, socially, structurally, while much of Florida quietly abandons that idea. Number 1. Okeechobee. Okeechobee sits where Florida's land still dictates value more than marketing ever could. Resting along the northern rim of the state's largest freshwater lake, Okeechobee supports roughly 5,700 residents, yet commands influence far beyond its size. This is cattle, canal, and conservation Florida, where water management matters more than waterfront branding, and where geography still overrules trend. Housing here continues to defy the broader state narrative. Median home prices consistently fall between $150,000 and $175,000, with older single-family homes appearing below $140,000, numbers that now feel archived rather than current. Rent follows the same rare logic. One-bedroom units frequently hover near $675 to $775, while three-bedroom homes rarely exceed $1,100, preserving livability without financial acrobatics. Ownership brings advantages that have quietly vanished elsewhere. Property taxes routinely remain under $1,200 annually, and insurance premiums stay manageable due to inland positioning and reduced exposure to Florida's favorite financial hazard, coastal volatility. Utility costs remain restrained, aided by minimal infrastructure bloat and disciplined population growth. The economy revolves around agriculture, ranching, logistics, water management, healthcare, and public services, generating a median household income near $39,000. It is not built for wealth acceleration. It is built for economic survival, which in Florida 2026 may be the more valuable outcome. Crime remains low and localized. Community feel calm without being artificially secured. Broadband supports modern life, even if ambition here still bows politely to physical reality. Okeechobee doesn't advertise affordability. It simply continues practicing it while the rest of the state keeps forgetting how.